Okay, this is my helper video for chapter 11. At some point my wife is going to be calling me, so I will have to pause the video. But let's just start. You're not watching this video for production value, you're watching it to learn about the questions that you need to be able to know answers to. Okay, so we start out here for chapter 11 with a inverse function. Inverse demand function here. And we are asked first to find the marginal revenue function. Right, if you're plotting this out here, I'm not going to be doing it exactly here, right? But for the price would change by, for every quantity that's changed, the inverse function would be changing by about twice that. Doesn't matter, I'm just going to write this out here. Demand equals price, but again, the marginal revenue function, but the marginal revenue function is going to reflect the idea that for this single price monopolist, it is twice as steep. Which would mean that it would be twice as steep as the inverse demand function. And so the problem made it easy because I already had my inverse function. But the idea would be is that it would be twice as steep. Again, these are not accurately plotted out, but that would be the general idea here. Okay. Let's look at number 2. So now we have an inverse demand function here and a cost function here, and we're asked to find the profit maximizing quantity and price. Oh, what would that be? That would be where MR equals MC, which in this case would mean that the marginal revenue is equal to 130 minus 2Q. But the marginal cost, the first derivative of this function, is equal to 5. MR equals MC, or 130 minus 2Q is equal to 5. Negative 2Q equals negative 125. Q is equal to 62.5. Again, your numbers are going to be a little bit different, but you can follow the math of what I did there. Then I would take this quantity, put it into my function here so that the price equals 130 minus Q. That would mean that price is equal to 130 minus 62.5. So that would mean that I am at 67.5. Sorry, I had to put it in the calculator just because I don't want to make a mistake here. And then to calculate the profit, marginal revenue is equal to the price times the quantity. That would be 67.5 times 62.5. That would give me total revenue. And so total revenue would equal 4218.75. Total cost is given by my total cost function here. So that'd be 10 plus 5 times 62.5. And that would be equal to 322.5. Then subtract the 2 from each other. Now, I better be seeing a positive number here because single price monopolists earn profit. The profit would equal 3896.25. And then we're asked how would this answer change And what would the increase in the fixed cost do? Well, if we increase the fixed cost, that would mean that there's no change to the marginal, to the marginal cost, right? Because fixed cost would just increase this factor here. So there would be no effect on the quantity. So we now are between A and D. Would it change the price and the profit level though? Well, right, in this case, at least the quantity we know wouldn't change. But if the quantity is not changing, nor should the price. So, right, instead of it just being just the quantity, it actually turns out to be both the price and the quantity. But then the profit will certainly decrease because we have higher fixed costs. So our correct answer is here. Let me repeat it again just so that I was kind of walking you through it, but then you might have gotten confused there in the middle. Because I only increased the fixed cost, that would make no adjustments to my marginal cost. So because nothing in this equation here was being adjusted, then the price and the quantity, equilibrium price and quantity, would not be affected. But the profit would decrease because the fixed costs have gone up. Okay, number 3. It wants us to start drawing some things out here. Well, it's hard to do here when I'm doing this in a static way here. How would I describe what's going on here? Well, I guess the easiest way to describe this would be is that for the first firm, I mean, essentially we're just following the rules of MR equals MC. So here, the first firm, right, for marginal cost curve 1, I shouldn't say the first firm, for marginal cost curve 1, MR equals MC. And then for the second kind of cost structure, part 2, for second factory, but then combined, it would be right here. So this is called this quantity combined, which would give us go up to the demand curve, a price combined. And we would just see that at this MR equals MC, where the marginal cost exists, that the marginal costs for totality are lower than what they are for the firms individually. Hopefully I've given you kind of enough information that when you're drawing it, you kind of can make sense of where things are. Number 4. So why is the ratio of the marginal price to the marginal cost smaller, right? This is talking about that kind of Lerner index. Why is the price to the marginal cost ratio smaller the more elastic the demand curve? Can the demand curve be inelastic at that quantity? Well, what we know, right, is that if we were to express this in terms of elasticity, right, and this is just from the slides here, is that that the ratio that the price is over the marginal cost, that margin, is equal to the elasticity over 1 plus the elasticity, which then means that it can't be inelastic. Why could it not be inelastic? Well, in this case, it can't be inelastic largely because the marginal revenue would then have to be negative. What this essentially means is that, as I would have said in the slides for the lecture, the single price monopolist always operates on the elastic portion of the demand curve. or essentially the upper half. So in this case, it's my choice, A. Suppose the monopoly has a price of $30 and the marginal cost is 18. What is the extent of the markup? Sorry, 15. Right? P equals MC over price. So in this case, it would be 30 minus 15 over 30, 15 over 30. So basically a 50% markup, given the numbers that I have here. And that would give me then for the elasticity of demand, right? Now what we would be calculating is, again, going back to the idea that the elasticity of demand would be P, again, over MC. And essentially, you would solve for E, which, right, in my case, right, or you could, again, you could cross multiply and then divide to simplify things out. You see this, just so that this makes a little bit more sense here, you see this kind of the lead into the calculation here, over here. So we could also just, using the learner index, so that you don't have to cross things out as much. It's the same thing here, but let's use this perhaps easier way of doing this. So 0.5 equals 1 over E. Yeah, essentially it would be 2 as an absolute value terms, but it would be -2 because it's an elasticity, a negative elasticity. Okay, for then going back to table 6 here, this would just be plugging and chugging. You would just fill in the blanks here. I did it. I don't want. I'll give you the answers here, and you should do the work though. You know, you don't want to leave yourself in a situation where you don't know how to do this. And check my math too. I may have made a mistake. Always possible. I found it was inelastic. Check my math. If you don't agree with my math, let me know. Okay. Number 7. Okay. So here we have our inverse demand function, which again, we can use to find our MR equal to MC. We're given the marginal cost here of 20. That would mean that my marginal revenue here is going to be 160 minus 2Q, which we would then set the two equal to each other. Okay, I just took that Q, put it into my inverse function. And then how does charging the monopoly a specific tax then of $12 affect the tax in the quantity? Well, essentially what you would do is you would have to incorporate that amount of the tax, this $12 per unit, into the marginal cost. So that's in turn going to change your profit maximizing quantity and price. And then my tip for you for solving the rest of this, and I don't want to go into too much detail here because you're not going to have to, I'm not going to be asking this really on the exam or on the problem set, but I want you to understand it theoretically. Is that the best way to do this is just start drawing the picture for yourself. Right, we've got a $20 marginal cost, add in the 12, so we've got 32 now equals MC after it. And again, you're going to have some sharing of the tax, and so then you would calculate these areas to find these right here. Again, if you're getting them, you're going to have different numbers here. So if that's why I'm trying not to like specifically do mine here because I'm worried it's going to confuse you. If you're having trouble with your specific numbers, let me know. I'm more than happy to make you a small mini video and walk you through it. Okay, number 8. I'm sorry, I was just trying to figure out what is this saying here. That was because on the previous one you had to say what it was changing by. You had to put the amount that it was changing by and then say whether it was increasing or decreasing. I was trying to figure out why is it say increase, decrease. Okay, number 8. So now we need to, if we look at this market here, we're calculating consumer surpluses and producer surpluses and total surplus. So you'd be calculating this area right here, this area right here, and then the whole thing. Let me just give you my final number. And again, hopefully, again, using the equation of 1/2 base times height for consumer surplus, I got 1012.5. For producer surplus, I got 1012.5. Not surprising given that our angles are equal here. That would mean adding that all up together, you get 20, 25. Then, instead of having the competitive market, what happens then when we move in number 9 to the monopolistic market? Again, we have our steeper marginal revenue curve. It's the same process. We're still just calculating our new consumer surplus, just comparing what we had in the past to what we have now. I'll give you my numbers, but essentially we just added that $30 tax, so you can see it shifts up the marginal cost curve here, just like we would have seen here in number 7. Here's the numbers I got. I got 200, and I got 600, 625, 1400, which is about a 1/3 incidence. Now, again, before you start saying, "Gosh, Shaheen, why don't you just like tell me how you got those numbers? Why do you just show them?" Well, the idea here again is that I'm not asking you to do this on the problem set, nor am I asking you to do it on the exam. I'm only asking that you do it here so that we can kind of show some evidence that you kind of had to work through it, suffer through it at some point. All you're doing here is using simple principles from geometry, where you're just solving 1/2 base times height, right? So essentially, again, what you're doing is calculating differences between this, for instance, for consumer surplus, the difference between this big triangle and that small triangle. If I started doing all the maths of that, it's going to make this video really long. If you're having trouble, you're not getting the same numbers I'm getting, send me an email. Happy to make a video that walks you through some of that. No shame in it. Just ask me and I will make it. Okay, then we have some definitional questions here for 10 through 12. When do we see these natural monopolies? Well, actually, all of these conditions are actually happening when we have a natural monopoly most of the time. What must be true for that natural monopoly to occur? Well, generally speaking, it's that the company has to be really large and that the lowest point on that average cost curve is really only what exists when just one firm is producing it. So that would be generally what we see here. Again, why is the government doing what it does? It's because it wants to create an entry barrier, right? I can't start my own rival electric company because, technically speaking, Hawaiian Electric is really the only electric company that's allowed to exist. And surprisingly, when I say this, you might think, oh, I didn't even think of that. Hawaiian Telecom is the natural monopoly for phone service. Now, Spectrum offers it as well, but it's not technically a telephone. Right, they're using like voice over internet protocol to do things. And then for cable service, the old Oceanic, which right was Viacom, I think at one point is now Spectrum, actually has a government license to provide cable TV. Hawaiian Telecom also provides that cable, but it's through a different kind of definition of what's considered cable TV. It's different when it's streaming, which is essentially what Hawaiian Telecom is doing, as is YouTube TV. Number 13. Suppose we have this firm with the cost function of 800 plus 15Q. Then our marginal cost would obviously be 15. Our average cost dividing these out by Q would give us 800 divided by Q plus 15. Here's my inverse function. So obviously by default or by definition, the marginal revenue would be twice as steep. And all that I'm asking you to do here is calculate then, based on what you know here, then what the firm's revenue would be, and then its cost. So you need to find you would need to set MR equal to MC, find the price, find the quantity, then find the total revenue, and then you would start to solve these. I'm going to give you my answers here, and you better hope that you're finding the same things. Again, we're doing this by the trust that you will tell me if you're not getting the same answers. And if you're frustrated, just email me. Ask me to walk you through more of the math of how I got those answers. But if you follow these steps and you've got that price and quantity, you're then using that information, plugging things into the cost function to find the firm's loss. That would be basically a negative profit, which we find by taking total revenue minus total cost. And then finding these alternative situations. If the regulator forced the firm to set the price equal to the average cost, what would the price instead be? And then what would the day weight loss be under that kind of scenario? These three are also definitional. So I'll leave them here just because, again, I'm trying to keep this video relatively short. So I'll let you suffer through these. You don't need my help with those, fortunately. I don't think. Here, you're going to be graphing things out. And again, we're going to be shifting up. You can see here that the marginal cost curve shifts up by the $12 amount of the tax. And so you can see the marginal cost curve is higher here. You would resolve for each of the prices. And then again, you're comparing the consumer surplus, the producer surplus, and the total surplus as a whole. If you are curious what I found, I got 13.5 and then 54, and then 31. The revenue for the government, would be 36, and that consumers are paying about 1/4, which I think you have to put it in as 0.25. If you're not getting those numbers, wholly email me. But again, you're just comparing again your calculation using the grid network here of your old consumer surplus and your new, and getting those changes. Sorry, and that the consumer surplus is decreasing. The producer surplus is also decreasing. And then obviously as a whole, the economic surplus would be decreasing, which is right, the economic surplus would just be our combination of the two. Okay. Need that. This is definitional. And that takes us to the last question here, I think. Yeah, the last question here. Also, I'm not sure, you're not going to have to calculate anything here. So you're just, then in this question, you're just looking at the various ways in which a regulated monopoly, single price monopolist, is regulated and how that generates a deadweight loss. So you just answer these parts here. Okay, I know this is a little bit short, but it's feeling rather guilty that my last video was so long. The idea of these videos is that the homework itself then becomes a lot more doable, a little bit less daunting, and that you're obviously getting some exposure to how to solve the problems. And again, in addition to that, you have the problem set helper video as well.